All right. Question number two. I don't know who asked it. What non-white and race-mixed people have to gain by supporting whites in the light of the cooperation dilemma? How to make all races cooperate? I think Martin, that answer, you wrote the answer there.
Yeah, that's my name. We can't make our races cooperate. That's the John Lennon level utopian thinking. But as for what others have to gain, it sure appears nobody else is going to get humanity and life on Earth in general of this planet before some extinction event.
Wow, you went all the way. You
And
went
I
all the way.
concur, which is why I'm in this whole enterprise.
Yes. I think if my view is if and I think this is obvious from the past 2 3 3 centuries. If between whites and East Asians, we would be fine, right? The problem is the rest of the world, and the problem is really the Middle East for everybody. And but uh, if it was just the those two groups because of the most neotonically evolved groups, I don't see a problem there. I mean, certainly doesn't appear to be one. And the problems I see would be brought by our people, Western people's current tolerance for the female behavior, this terrible female behavior. Anyway, so what was this question again? We can't make, okay, so here's the simple math of it. We can cooperate across some span of indifference, right? If everybody's equal, what happens? We starve to death, right? Because we have nothing to trade.
Mhm.
Brains are no longer valuable. If we are equal and we have brains, we would immediately begin diverging in order to find some value in order to engage in trade, which would be engaging in cooperation, right? So if we uh, if we so the problem for our humankind is at least three levels. First, the impolitic one we don't want to talk about is there's about a standard deviation between the, the Africans, the South Eurasians, and the Europeans, and there's somewhere between a quarter and a half a standard deviation between Europeans and East Asians, right? Right. So the problem is that that means that, and excuse me, when you combine that with there is a minimum intelligence necessary to be able to function in a society dependent upon any kind of reasoning logic, and worse, on any kind of mechanical aptitude. In other words, the ability to systematically understand how something operates. These aren't opinions, these are facts. Those numbers appear to be something like 85 and 105, right? Just somewhere in that vicinity. If you got to be 105 IQ to fix a machine, right? That's read instructions and fix a machine. That's my view of the minimum bar. That's my understanding of the minimum bar. Are there people with 95 IQs that can fix machines? Yes, but they also have conscientiousness and interest. Are there people of 115 who can't fix machines because they lack conscientiousness? They lack the ability to hold on attention, and they have other impulses that drive. Absolutely, with other interests. But generally, this principle is true. So now you have a biological problem between the races. The second thing on top of that is that it's your advantage to work with people most similar to you. And we do grant. I mean, even if you look at every group, we prefer to work with people like us, right? And it turns out religion is a really big one. It's just really weird to me, but it turns out to be a really big one. Probably the biggest one because it's subconscious. And then, and so then you have stage of development. Then you have trust because of stage of development. And across that whole thing, you have the metaphysical value judgments that we call the group evolutionary strategy. And so when you look at this, you can look at the maps of cities and see that even in heterogeneous polities, people of different races group together in neighborhoods. Well, they group together in neighborhoods because they're different in capability, therefore they're different economics, therefore they're different in status, and status is the human measure of self reward and self failure. So anti-suppression of neuroticism. So when you put people together like this, and you push them into proximity, if they're sufficiently unequal, you're going to get conflict. However, when you find is when people are ethnically, and I mean, I'm not saying racially, I'm saying ethnically, which means culturally homogenous. And that means they're marginally indifferent in biological factors. Right, it's like,
Well, it's more specific than racial.
I know it is, but I'm trying to I try to give a little more room than you do, Martin. Right? And not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's what
I'm saying that it means that even different nationalities within a race often cannot get along.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I'm agreeing with you. So thank you. That was good. I expect you to go the other way. I think, but you looked at the different side of the problem. So like we've done great research on this. Most of your friends will be within 6 degrees of genetic separation. In other words, they're cousins. Why? Right? This turns out to be really weird in all these circumstances. Now, how can you become cousins? Well, you can have a similar occupation, a similar ethical background, a similar familiar. I mean, one of the things that I love that Francis showed yesterday is, he's from basically an aristocratic family too, right? And so, what's the difference between world aristocratic families? Not much. What's the difference between world peasant families? A shitload. So,
Is Anna Karenina principle?
What?
Is this Anna Karenina principle again?
Exactly. Why do you tease me that I quote you on that all the time?
Well, because you started after I mentioned it 2 times.
Well, you were right. I mean, so what do you want to? If you're going to be right, I'm going to quote you. So it's the Anna Karenina principle that a lot of things have to go right in order for you to all get along, and if anything goes wrong, you're not going to get along, right? Which is the Anna Karenina principle of families. All happy families are the same, and all unhappy families are different, which means that everything has to go right to have a happy or a healthy family.
It's actually generalizable to all stable relations.
Exactly.
They are all stable in one way and can be unstable in very different ways.
We didn't show that. We didn't have that. Francis, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't show that. I love that picture. Was your grandfather or great grandfather?
Yeah, it was my grandfather.
Grandfather. Francis is a very fancy grandfather. Very fancy.
I don't know. I think your family is even fancier. I mean, my grandfather at the time, I think he was probably a captain in the in the Chinese Navy, which is a joke because the Chinese didn't have a Navy, really.
All right, you play it down, but he was sitting there with a very important people doing very important things, right? So
yeah, he did help in drafting the UN Charter on the military side of the UN Charter.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not. My uncle Jimmy Doolittle's famed for bombing Tokyo, but nobody remembers that he's the guy that did the investigation for Eisenhower into the military-industrial complex, right? To see if it was. I mean, he's a pretty interesting guy, right? I mean, so but my point here is that that we all develop. Like, I would like to know Martin's background, right?
Me too.
I would like to know Martin because you just have an your mind is uncommon. You fit in with us just fine. So, um, how do we get distracted here? I was trying to make a point, and I'm so fascinated by
I think you
Francis.
got there from all aristocrats,
Oh, right.
largely the same.
Right,
Aristocratic families across the world largely same, but peasant
largely the same.
families differ very much.
Right. That's because who are you dependent upon? Right. The Francis's camera automatically flicks off every 30 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, it's got and it's not even a setting that I can change. It's
Change.
just I just need to press the shutter button halfway, and then it'll wake up again.
So anyway, my point was that to confirm what Martin said is that that trade makes us, in other words, homogeneous polities can trade with other homogeneous polities infinitely, though there will be a meritocratic stacking, of course, based on the productivity of the different polities, right? But that doesn't mean that they can share the same polity, because the needs for norms, traditions, values, institutions, etc., differ too much. And the status signals that result in suppressing your neuroticism as basically a social animal, that status system is too punitive if you're in conflict with people you cannot compete with. So one of the reasons, and I was looking to get someone a referral to a psychologist yesterday. So I called a friend of mine, actually psychiatrist, not a psychologist. So I called her and I said, I got a guy that, he's on the spectrum and I want to get a referral for him. And the problem we ended up talking about for a half an hour, supposed to be a 5-minute call, was that the psychology industry is pegged right now. You can't get an appointment with anyone good. And the reason is mental health is off the charts. Now we know a lot of it's actually social media, right? It's so what's happened to social media. We know a lot of that, but a lot of it is also this false promise of that we're all the same, integrated, and whatever.
There's also mutational load.
Say again?
There's also mutational load.
Right. Oh, yeah, I don't. Martin's going to make me bring up the bad side, which is that our IQ is decreasing and our mutational load is increasing. So we're getting, we have people who are less able, less trained, and less able in less stable social political status relationships, and with less training with which to endure it. And so this is of course the problem of the female education system, which is that you're a bright and shiny flower who will blossom lovely. When in reality we're all super predators of one degree or another, and we actually need rituals and rules and training and discipline so that we know how to get along together. And when you tell people that they can do whatever they want, that just means you're rewilding a population. And when you rewild a social animal population, you basically make people crazy. And that's what we're seeing as a rewilding of a population, because the world is incomprehensible and your actions undecidable. What do you do when there's no way to get when you're no positive reinforcement for whatever you do? I mean, guys like us, we're going to be fine. But look at I don't know. I'm going to be weird no matter what. Maybe you guys will be fine. But sorry, I was just cutting that one off at the pass in case anyone thought they were going to dish it at me first. But the mental illness problem is really serious. I mean, who talked about that? Was that did Rudyard's talk about that at the conference? Didn't he talk about the mental illness
Yeah, I
problem?
think that sounds about familiar. If not at the conference, at least in one of his videos,
Videos,
one of
right.
his more recent videos. Oh, I think he equated to the Black Death. It's like we're in a
Yeah, yes, that's
psychological
right.
Black Death
Yes,
period right
we're
now.
having a psychological Black Death. and it's true. All right. So we answered that one. You Martin was correct. You can't have this John Lennon utopian thinking. What you can have is markets with a lot of communities, like which is our motto, with let 1,000 nations bloom. We can get to the point where we are cooperating maximally. I think Martin is the second question is why do people want people have no immediate emotional psychological interest in supporting either whites or East Asians in light of the cooperation around. They actually don't. What they have is an immediate interest in their own immediate benefit. The problem is that, as Martin says here, and as Francis confirmed, it just doesn't seem like there's anybody else who's going to get us off this planet before some extinction level event. And of course, if you understand my work at all, you'll find that one of my more offensive arguments is that the failure of the eugenics movement was the failure of the 20th century. Because had we not failed the eugenics movement, we would not be having these particular issues. And the eugenic, I view the Marxist, postmodern, feminist, woke sequence as a counter-revolution against Darwin and the progressive eugenics movement, which was not abusive. I mean, the Nazis might have been abusive. I don't have an opinion on it, but no more abusive than anybody else in history. But the idea that we should be extremely careful about our rates of reproduction, our quality of reproduction, and the composition of the biological and genetic composition of our polities. That's just something that's a failure that, in my view, is probably the greatest threat to being the what it prevents what is it that prevents humans from intelligent life from evolving?
The great filter.
The great filter. So my fear is that we've already passed the great filter and we failed it. So that's why that drives. That's how I express what you, Francis, and Martin expressed earlier on. I'm afraid that the failure of the eugenics program was the great filter, and I can see how that can happen. And so I'm worried about it.
In terms of that eugenics movement, I was reading a book by Richard Lean on dysgenetics, and he noticed he documented
Great book,
history.
by the way.
He documented the history of the eugenics movement. So essentially boils down to early 20th century, late 19th century, everybody's doing it, right? In fact, some British societies started as a eugenics society and so on. And then after the war, after World War II, I maybe it's because the Nazis gave it a bad name, or maybe it's the capture of Western institutions by a elite hostile to the Western evolutionary strategy or whatnot. Eugenics in the last 50 years or so became a dirty term, whereas all these institutions started as essentially pushing for eugenics.
Yes.
Well, those elites used the narrative of the Nazis to undermine eugenics.
Yes, yes.